Ah boy, where do I even start? So as is immediately obvious to many of you is that I'm not using a pure SR team this time. I tried for hours to try to make it work, but as far as I can tell, it is completely impossible to do this challenge with only SR characters. And as you can see, I'm actually using 3 SSR gacha characters here, which is more than I've used in any other challenge video I've done. Now, I do think it might be possible to shave 1 or even 2 of these SSRs out, but only if I had the appropriate characters built to a very ridiculous extreme. But I guess I'll talk a little bit about that later. First, I'll talk about the fight itself. Now first I want to point out that I am aware that there is a cheese strategy for this fight that involves getting Close mind controlled and then giving them Aurora Ring and heal reversing them, or rather Curse of Wounding them with Listel. As usual, I am trying to avoid cheese strategies for these videos if I can. Try to showcase something a little bit more straightforward or something that can be applicable to a larger number of characters, or at least that's what I try to do if I can't do the SR clear, so that maybe the strategy can be adapted to a lot of different people. But if you do have Close and Listel, I highly recommend that you use that method because it's a very easy method to clear this map. It's relatively low investment. I'm sure you can find a video for it if you search on YouTube, so with that out of the way, let's talk about this fight. So for this fight, you're fighting 3 Kitty Cat Macks. These cats continuously put stacks on your characters, and if you reach 100 stacks of this debuff, you will completely lose control of that character. You won't be able to get them back. Now all 3 of these bosses apply 3 of these stacks at the end of their turns, but if you kill any of them, they'll start giving you 10 stacks instead. So that means if you kill one of them, you will actually start getting 20 stacks at the end of a turn, because there's 2 of them left. So clearly this mechanic is here to encourage you to fight all 3 at the same time and try to kill them at least relatively close to each other, so that you don't just get overwhelmed with the stacks that they give you. So out of these cats, 2 of them are physical and 1 of them is magical. The one on the left, which is Alert Mack, is the magical one. He has a very dangerous AoE skill and he can mind control people. Purely because of this one cat, I feel like it's important to just kill him and just rush your way through this fight. I think it's actually a lot easier to do that than to just fight it normally. So that's what you're seeing me do up to this point. So right now you're actually seeing one of the rare occasions that my Tiaras is attacking. The reason for this is that one of the physical cats is a tank, and even though they're immune to just about any of the good debuffs you can think of, they did leave an exception for mobility down. So by pinning him down using a Goddess's left hand, I am able to finish killing off Alert Mack as fast as possible. The fact that they're not immune to mobility down is pretty much one of the only nuances that this fight has. This fight is otherwise a very straightforward slugfest because they're immune to just about everything. They have a ton of HP, they do a lot of damage. And the thing about this particular strategy is that because the beginning behavior of all these cats is very consistent, because a lot of their skills start on cooldown, so they start the fight in more or less the same way most of the time. So I spend the first 3 turns just DPSing down Alert Mack as fast as I can. If I don't manage to kill Alert Mack on the same turn that he mind controls somebody, obviously that opens up one of the sides for him to run out and just do his AoE, and honestly that's just something I don't want to deal with at all. If you can manage to kill Alert Mack within these first 3 turns, it's a pretty decent indication that you should have the DPS output to finish the other 2 off before you run out of time, and the cats just mind control everyone because you have too many stacks. The skills from the other 2 cats are basically complete non-issues after that point. If you can, you do want the tank to take the Curse of Wounding attack from Brave Mack though, especially if you're using Tiaras for your DPS. I mean, obviously you don't want to be cursed and then take damage every time you go attack. But aside from that, it turns this fight into a pretty generic beatdown. And while all this is happening, you just use the dog that you are given, and you just apply common sense with the dog's skills and try to lower the stacks of the person with the most stacks. I guess the only other thing worth noting about the dog is that his skills count as doing damage to your own units. So as you can see, every time I use the dog, I actually give Parn another stack of his talent. So that means if you bring someone like Brenda, you can actually just use the dog to give her extra stacks and she will be able to act again more often. Anyway, with that out of the way, I want to talk a little bit about my team comp because I think the team composition I'm using here might look like it's very restrictive. I'm using some pretty rare characters, especially SP Elwin, which I know a lot of people don't have, but I actually think this comp can be very flexible, and I'm going to try to explain some substitutions maybe that you can make if you don't have Listel or Close and you want to try this strategy yourself with your own powerful DPS. So let's start with Matthew. Obviously everybody has Matthew, but you can replace Matthew with just about anybody who faction buffs you. In fact, I could have just had Elwin faction buff here and it wouldn't really have changed much. Obviously I would have replaced Parn if I had Elwin faction buff instead. So the big thing I want to highlight here is that Matthew has attack command. This is really important for killing the boss fast enough. You want to have the bonus stats if you can. So you know, Angelina, Gerald and Layla, Lamford, or especially Rosalia are all good replacements for the way I use Matthew in this strategy. Now I want to single out Rosalia especially because Rosalia is actually insanely good for this fight, or at least the way I'm doing it. Because, I mean, just look at the way I'm fighting this guy. I'm surrounding these guys and just pummeling them with my DPS over and over. If you have the sword down, that means all your stats go up and all the DPS heal themselves, which removes the need for a lot of the healing here. And I probably wouldn't even need Tiaras here. I could just have a 4th DPS and I would just kill them even faster. So I don't know, I have Elwin and Parn here as 2 of my big DPSs. Now obviously Elwin is probably my biggest DPS here because I have him in his SP class. I have his Reign of Glory skill to guarantee double Sword Soul. But honestly I can bring any number of DPS. The only thing I would note is that you probably want DPS that have a lot of movement, or at the very least you probably want 2 DPS that have good movement, so that at the start you can surround the Mage Mack very quickly. Because if you leave any open spaces, the Mage Mack is just going to be able to run around and use his AoE attack, and that's just going to make a mess of things. Now obviously the easiest way to get into position is to just have DPSs that have Strike or Chivalry. The aforementioned Rosalia, of course, is once again a really good choice. But you know, anybody with Chivalry or Strike can work here. Obviously Leon, the darling of many PvE strategies, is really, really great here. Once again, Lamford. Lamford giving everybody more stats. He has Chivalry. He even has a faction buff if you want to bring a tacticians team. Brenda, of course, has Strike, and as mentioned, Brenda can act again, and the dog can make her act again even more. I don't know if I would recommend D-Hard for this. I mean, D-Hard can faction buff, and he has Strike, but he's pretty mediocre as far as DPS goes, and I think there's probably way fewer people with a really built Leon as opposed to a really built D-Hard. Now, I mentioned earlier that it may be possible for me to do this fight with fewer SSRs, and the first substitution I would think of is to put Sonya in place of Elwin here, possibly. My own problem with that is that my Sonya just isn't built that much. As you saw in an earlier video, I still don't have any runestones put into her, and even if I did, I don't have a gear set specifically made for Sonya, and that's really the big problem. These final challenges really demand that you have top-end characters, at least in terms of like the chance they have and just the build they have for that specific character. And Sonya is one of those characters where you need a specific set for her to be good. And Sonya kind of suffers in maps like this, where there really isn't any mooks for her to kill so she can increase her stats. But the important thing is to be able to burst down the Mage Cat very quickly, and then try to have a sustained amount of DPS after that. I think that might have been possible to achieve if I had like a really high-powered Sonya 3C, but that would mean I would need very, very strong attack and intelligence enchants on her at the same time. And obviously, being someone who has not even bought Sonya's special weapon yet, I probably don't have any equip sets like that lying around. As for Parn here, I mean, you can replace him with just about anybody you want to. You know, anybody who fits your faction that you choose to bring in here. Parn really is just a generic DPS for me here. He's a pretty good one for sure, but there's no reason you wouldn't be able to match or outdo his DPS with any of these strong single target SSR DPSs. Next is the tank. So I brought Vargas here. Now I tried a couple different tanks, and the thing that really annoys me about this fight is that they put a Cav and Lancer effective skill on one of the cats, and my Grineer actually ended up getting one-shot all the time, and it's not like I could have converted him into Bow Knight anyway, because the important thing is that I need the tank to bait one of the attacks from the right side cat at the very first turn, and that's not going to happen if your tank is a 2-range unit like Bow Knight Grineer is. Now Vargas of course is a Lancer, but he has 2 things on his side. First off, I have a solid Guardian Infantry soldier for him to use. Vargas is more tanky at high HP, which is usually what he's going to be at when I have him take a hit. And Vargas is just really, really tanky physically in general. So out of the SR units, you know, I think Vargas is probably the best choice here. You can also go with Serena. I mean, Serena, she has entrenchment, which might make it a little bit safer, but I don't think that's really necessary. One of the great things about Vargas for this strategy is that he has Battle Cry. So later on in the fight, even though my Vargas isn't really that strong and doesn't have really strong power stabs, just the Battle Cry debuffs alone just makes him contribute a lot to the team DPS. Alternative, I also could have brought Kuwabara. Kuwabara, of course, also has a revive, and he doesn't have Battle Cry, but he actually does have Attack Support L, which can serve a similar function to Vargas' Battle Cry here. And actually, Emmerich wouldn't have been a bad choice either. Emmerich, of course, would have locked down the tank, which removes any need for me to attack him with Goddess Left Hand. And he also has Defense Intimidate. Oh, by the way, right now on screen you're seeing that my Elwin is getting an Illumination activation from his sword for Sword Soul. And this is without Reign of Glory up. So what you're going to see me do for the rest of the video is that I'm actually not going to use Sword Soul anymore. Just to show that I actually didn't even need that luck proc for there. Anyway, the last 2 units I brought here are Tiaras and Liana. So Tiaras really is super helpful here. She provides just so much healing, and I don't think it would have been possible to achieve anything similar with any of the SR characters. I mean, I could have brought Close, maybe. Aurora Ring does provide a good amount of healing, but the problem is that Close has no offensive support. Close herself, of course, can attack for a decent bit of damage, but it in no way compares to what Tiaras can do here with Attack, Blessing, and Miracle. The DPS sustain really is one of the biggest issues in this fight. And like I mentioned before, if you brought someone like Rosalia or even Yulia, who can heal the other DPS while they're attacking, it kind of removes the need for Tiaras to be here. One other bonus thing about Yulia is that earlier when I needed to disable the guard from the tank Mack, I could have just put up Godly Menace the turn before and Yulia would just lock him down. And Liana here, again, it's really hard to replace her because of the Act Again. Once again, Close can sort of replace the need for Prayer. Aurora Ring is just a very powerful heal. I could even suggest maybe Imelda. Imelda's whip might have lowered the threshold needed for my DPS so I could clear the Mage Mack quicker at the start. But the problem with that is that, as you saw, for the one turn where one of my characters gets mind controlled, and for me you saw that it was Matthew, I left Liana out to tank the one hit from him. And the reason I did that is quite simple. I didn't want Matthew attacking into Vargas. I mean, there's a pretty good chance that Matthew would just kill himself, or he'd just make things harder for Vargas to tank, something like that. I guess one final thing I will add here is that you probably notice a conspicuous absence of 2 units I very often bring to these clears, which is Chris and Almeida. Now, Almeida can actually increase the damage of the entire team by giving out the right debuffs, but I honestly wasn't interested in sitting around resetting the fight until she just perfectly gave out defense minus and damage taken plus repeatedly over multiple turns. I mean, it is theoretically possible that she does that, but I'm sure, as you can imagine, it just sounds like such a huge pain in the ass, and I've already wasted a lot of time on this challenge. I didn't really want to waste any more. Now, the problem with Chris, in comparison to someone like Yulia, or even someone like Rosalia, is that she cannot consistently heal herself and her team at the same time. When you think of Chris doing Discipline, alongside her Faith and her Gift of Eternal Life, I mean, she's going to take a lot of damage herself when she attacks, so the Discipline can be used to heal herself, of course, but then you kind of have to hope that the Gift of Eternal Life and her Faith heal the right people. And one of the issues is that at the very start of this map, Vargas had to take a really big hit, so there was a really good chance that anytime Chris uses her skills to heal people, she's just gonna damage Vargas instead, who is at this point Curse Wounded. It just feels like this map was designed very specifically to screw over a lot of low-budget strategies you could have used to tackle it. Obviously, Chris could heal the entire party with Redemption instead, but Redemption has a very long cooldown. Finally, I didn't bring Sophia instead of one of the healers. Now, potentially Rewind can be good enough to give your DPS that oomph needed to bust through the Mage Mack at the very beginning, but you just need really strong DPS for that to happen. And the flexibility of Act Again is usually just way stronger. And of course, Liana is the complete package. She has flexibility with Act Again, and she's just a huge, powerful AoE healer. And she's also decently tanky with her Shrine Maidens, which is not the case with a character like, say, Imelda. Imelda is an excellent offensive support, but, you know, she just dies to everything. Well, at any rate, I think that is about all I gotta say about this fight. So for once, I actually had enough to say to fill almost the entire video. So I apologize to anybody who might have been disappointed that I wasn't able to clear this with a full SR team, and in fact had to resort to using 3 SSRs here. But honestly, I'm not interested in spending any more time on this fight. If any of you out there are still stuck on this challenge, and maybe do not have access to the Listel cheese, I really hope that this video was useful. And let's finish this off by watching Elwin just beat the shit out of this stupid cat, because this cat has been giving me grief for many hours now, and I just want him to die. Anyway, thanks to anybody who watched this entire video, and maybe thanks for listening to me rant on this fight a little bit. Hopefully next time I'll be able to clear up with just SRs, but it really feels like they're trying to design these challenges to prevent that. See you guys next time.